You going to do your 2?
I'm going to do my 2. I guess I'll stay here for this. So you can have a nap. No. I'll work through this quickly. We always get lots and lots of questions on the 2, but I believe we also do more training on the 2 than anything else in terms of sessions that we do around the state. So I think I'll go through the whole presentation, and then I'll take I'll take a few questions. We don't have a whole lot of time to go into it, so I'm also happy to answer questions when we're done in terms of the 2. So if you have questions that aren't super specific to your institutions but are general questions, please do share these when I finish. The 2 is, we have the 2 because of statute, because of the TSI statute, which requires institutions to assess students' academic skills. And as you can see, it has been amended every year, or I should say every session for the past 5. And so that's one reason the 2 is a bit challenging, is because it seems like after every session we have to make changes to it to adjust for changes to the TSI statute. So we know it's challenging, and we appreciate the work that you do for reporting. Now that we have student success points at the community colleges, we've had a lot more interest in the 2. I think people are really trying hard to get that reported correctly, because institutions it is tied to funding for community colleges. The 2 is an end-of-semester report. As I mentioned before, the introductory materials are very important. In fact, we have to go in and make a change now, because we had legislation that now allows students who have taken college prep courses to use those courses for up to 2. Those courses can be used up to 2 years after a student graduates from high school. So we already have a change we know that's coming down the pike after this session. In working with the 2, the most important thing to understand is we have some introductory items. Many of them look very similar to what we have on all our reports. We collect race, ethnicity information, etc. But we do have one introductory item about waivers and exemptions. I'm going to talk about that in more detail in a few minutes. Then we move into the subject area items, and we have numbered them so that an item that's number 20 in math is going to be number 40 in reading, is going to be number 60 in writing. 21 in math, 41 in reading, 61 in writing. And those of you who use reports understand that, but it's very helpful in terms of thinking about it and understand. We're pretty much asking the same questions for math readiness, then reading readiness, then writing readiness. We did add, last fall, we added some ABE diagnostic level questions because there was interest in the field and learning. Well, first of all, it was important because we couldn't tell if a student was ABE or DE without getting these diagnostic levels reported to us. So that is something that you all should be doing now, and it's on the report. In terms of our FTI See Students, one of the big challenges with the 2 is most of our accountability measures, the measures we report out for the 2, we track first-time in college students. So were students ready when they first got to college? And then did they get ready over time? And then when did they take their first college-level course? That type of thing. But when you report information to us on the 2, it's for all of your students. And when you get back your edit reports, it's for all of your students. So it's often not until later. For example, when the almanac comes out and people open up and say, whoa, this data doesn't look right for my institution, or when accountability comes out, it's often then that we'll realize, well, there was some misreporting, but it got buried because you couldn't see information about your FTIC cohort and what they look like for readiness. So you couldn't see that, hey, we'd reported ACT, SAT exemptions, but we missed it this year, so we're not reporting a single student in our first time in college cohort with those exemptions, and we should have been. That type of thing has happened a lot. So Charlie Busby on our staff, who works with the 2 data, has created a special report where he is able to pull the items you normally see on the edit check related to the 2 and readiness for your FTIC cohort. And we're right now trying to think about the best way to get that information to you. But we're going to try to, whether we do it on the secure server, or we post it somewhere, or we look to see if there's real discrepancies from past years and we just provide the information to institutions with issues, we don't know. But we have created a report that our analysts will be able to run to just see, hey, what does my FTIC cohort look like? Does it look similar to last year? So that, gee, when that almanac does come out, it will all make sense, and we won't realize, we didn't quite, get the data right for those first-time students. So I'm very pleased that we're going to have that moving forward. Waivers versus exemptions, very simply, waiver is a term related to the TSI report. Obviously, we use waivers for that terminology is used for lots of things in terms of reporting and funding and all of that. But in terms of the TSI report alone, waiver is used for reporting. It is not used otherwise in terms of the TSI statute and rules. So if you're talking to someone who's not familiar with reporting and you're using the term waiver, you're probably going to really confuse them. The reason we report in terms of waivers versus exemptions for reporting, and this has been done for years, went back to long before I started with TASP, is because there are some exemptions that when a student is exempt, once they enroll, they are always exempt. ACT, SAT, etc. And then there are some exemptions, and they're called exemptions in the statute or the rules, where they might apply one semester. Say when a student enrolls as a level 1 certificate student, and then the student enrolls as seeking an associate degree, and that they have no longer got an exemption for TSI. And so we have used the term waivers in situations where it is not a permanent exemption. Now, when these college prep courses came through in statute through the legislature 2 sessions ago, then suddenly we had a situation where a student could take a college prep course and be considered met at an institution, exempt at an institution that accepts that course or that helped develop that course, but not met somewhere else. So we just carried over the waiver term for those students as well, because it's going to vary. So students from college prep courses are also reported with a waiver. The key thing with that is that when we run your data is to say, here's how many students met coming in and here's how they did moving forward. If you're accepting that college prep course and saying that student is ready with a waiver because of a college prep course, we're going to consider them ready in our reports. So we're going to say, all right, here's your students who met coming in and here's how they did on their first college level course, et cetera. Because that's really how your institution has said by accepting that prep course, hey, we think this student is ready. We're going to accept students who have completed this course that we've reviewed, we helped develop. So that's how it will be viewed when we report out. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that moving forward. You're telling us they're waived, but don't get nervous. It says not ready or waived. But we have a place in item 22 for the waivers, and I'm going to quickly just go to there. We have a place where that college prep, here it is, where you can tell us the waiver is for a college prep course, so we can know which waivers were college prep and which were other things. So that's a key new thing to understand. Quickly, in terms of the waiver on item 10, we do have some people who get confused. Item 10 applies to all of the courses, so if you have someone who has a waiver on a level 1 certificate, they're going to be waived for math, reading, and writing. So you can just tell us that here. If they're enrolled in dual credit and they met eligibility standards but not TSI standard, that's going to be a waiver. Okay. If they're in active military, that's going to be a waiver that doesn't apply to subject areas. We have some blanket exemptions, like for past military folks or for people who have earned degrees from other institutions, et cetera. We also have a waiver now that applies. It's a different type of waiver, but it's for students who require ESOL, and it just basically waives them from TSI until they're ready to even take a test. So we have waivers and exemptions, and this item, it just sort of keys us in with reporting that, hey, this person has a waiver and exemption. But when you get to those subject area, that information, it's also important that you let us know there about the waivers. Item 20 changed this time through. It didn't change for item 40 and 60 in terms of algebra and math. We had some changes just related to math on item 20. I think we spent a lot of time training on this, so I'll be happy to answer questions when I'm finished, but this is for those students in those algebra who are doing DE for algebra intensive coursework on that pathway versus doing DE that will prepare them for non-algebra intensive courses. So you can tell us now, and I think most people are aware of this, that a student who required DE, that student is now ready to move into non-algebra intensive college-level math courses. One thing that we've had confusion around relates to the student's initial testing, initial placement. The TSI assessment is strictly for determining if someone is ready, or I shouldn't say strictly for, but a student who tests as ready on the TSI assessment for math, they're ready for any math at all. We don't have different cut scores for algebra intensive and non-algebra intensive. So that's really important for people to understand. The prep course, up to this point in time, is structured the same way. If someone passes that prep course and your institution agrees to accept it, then they are considered ready as if they had met the standard on the TSI test. They're ready to go into algebra or non-algebra intensive coursework. Again, things morph and change. I've heard a lot of conversations, but right now that's what we're looking at in terms of reporting. So be sure you have that understanding that it's not related to initial placement. It's those students who were initially tested, didn't meet the standard. They can go in a Dev Ed pathway that will get them ready for non-algebra intensive, or a Dev Ed pathway that will get them ready for algebra intensive. The college prep course does apply item 20, 40, and 60 in terms of the college prep course waiver, and I just talked about that, so hopefully that's pretty clear. And it's just a little more information about the college prep course that I think I talked about. I did have one thing come up. This was good for me to be reviewing all of this. 21, 41, and 61, where you tell me it's a prep course. The student had a prep course waiver. It's only set up to say they had a waiver because my institution created the course, or they have a waiver because we're following an MOU. We may need to think about creating something that said they had a waiver and they transferred to me, and so I'm going to honor that, because they had a waiver and they're done with their math. I don't know how else you would report that student. The institution could still report them as they had a waiver and now they're transferred to me, instead of reporting them as ready. And that gets a little complicated. I won't go into it now, but that's something we probably want to think about. If we have a transfer student who had a prep course waiver, generally, if they took their math and they successfully completed it, the receiving institution can review that as any other college level coursework and say, yeah, they've met or not. Okay. So let me just move on to, we have items, these items for the assessment test used at placement. Everyone should be giving students the TSI assessment now. People should not be using, for TSI purposes, AccuPlacer or Compass or MAPS or any of those old tests. That's all changed, and everyone should be using the TSIA assessment. I had a question come in before the training. Tell me the difference between TSIA, TSI assessment, et cetera. It gets confusing, but basically the TSI assessment was shortened and people now refer to it as the TSIA. It's the exact same thing. So sometimes it's spelled out, sometimes it's not, but it is the state assessment for TSI. We're calling it, again, the TSIA in some places. So didn't mean to confuse people if they thought there were two different tests out there. It's just the one test. Okay. Talked about the diagnostic scores, and I also talked earlier about the fact that if someone does an NCBO, you can report. This is the item 23, where you can say, yeah, they were involved. They participated in an alternative non-course based method for DE during this period. So that's where you'd tell us if you're not reporting it for funding. And if you are reporting it for funding, you can still tell us here. You don't have to. Okay, and this last item, it is an important item that people get confused about. Why do we have items about students meeting at the beginning of the semester, and then you have an item about students meeting at the end of semester, but you can report to us, yeah, this student met at the beginning, so we're telling you on the end of the semester item that the person met at the beginning. The reasoning behind that, for those of you who weren't around when this was happening, is because we were told by a lot of institutions that they don't get the information that a student has met, the official information, until after the census date. And if your student information system is set up that you can't then tell us on the two that, yes, they met by census date, we gave you the option that if you don't get that information until November, you can enter it into your system on this item and tell us, yes, this student met by census date. So it's basically doing the same thing as item 20, saying, yep, the student had already met by the census date, but it allows you to tell us later. So for some institutions, this is a non-issue, and it's probably very confusing. For others, this is a lifesaver for them. This is a way for them to let us know, yeah, that student had met coming in, but our system, we had to put in their scores before our system would register that student, and if they gave us their scores late, the system had already rolled over, and we couldn't let you know that they'd already met. So that's why this item is here. Now, if people tell me that has changed and every system can account for students coming in, then we'll remove it. But that's why that's here. The other reason I want to talk about this item is this is where if you have a student who, if you're doing that NCBO at the beginning of the semester, even if it's done before the census date, we want you to tell us that student hadn't met coming in, and then this is where you can tell us the student, and I think I have it spelled out. Yeah, this is where you can tell us that the student met during the semester. So, yes, the student met at my institution. Oh, I'm sorry, I moved on to the next thing. So I guess I don't, here it is, yeah. Nah, I didn't print that one out. Okay, well, in any case, you have an option to tell us that the student met at your institution during the semester. So please tell us that for the student if they weren't ready when they first came in and tested and you got them ready. Okay, and finally, first college level course completion. This is important. This should match the S. Sometimes it doesn't. It's important to make sure those are aligned. And we have ABE levels. So that's it for our CBM 002. Again, we've talked about this a lot. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, well, we're going to move on then. And again, I'll be happy to take questions when we're all finished, and I'll wait around. So if you've got something particular, feel free to bring it to us.